Little Red Riding Hood wasn't just warned about the big bad wolf's teeth, and Cinderella wasn't looking for a prince, she wanted revenge on her stepmother. As for Bluebeard, turns out he wasn't such a villain after all. We know these characters thanks to Charles Perrault and the Brothers Grimm, who polished medieval folktales into literary gems. But the original stories? They were about something entirely different. As far back as the 14th century, European mothers told their daughters cautionary tales, like the one about a girl, alone and unaccompanied, who wandered into the woods and fell into the clutches of a starving wolf. That story ended on a grim note. The woodcutters and miraculous rescue were added much later. Because medieval fairy tales weren't meant to entertain, they were stark warnings: never go out alone. The wolf symbolized danger, and there was no shortage of it back then: foreign invaders, highway bandits, and worse. Europe at the time was a patchwork of chaos. England and France spent over 100 years redrawing their borders, while the heart of the continent simmered with unrest. And where there's conflict, there are deserters, looters, and predators. So Red Riding Hood's warnings were justified, but being eaten was far from the only risk she faced. For young girls, an encounter with wolves could lead to other misfortunes. Some editions of Little Red Riding Hood include Perrault's added moral: young children, mark this well. When strangers speak, be wary. Their honeyed words may lead to health, or straight to wolf's belly. The lines that follow, about a maiden's virtue, make it clear Red Riding Hood, on her way to Grandma's, was risking more than just becoming the wolf's lunch. Perrault reshaped the folktale and gave the girl a distinct identity. That scarlet hood? A fashionable accessory among French peasant girls, worn by young women eager to catch the eye. In more puritanical households, such bold colors were forbidden. So was Red Riding Hood a flirt? And was Perrault hinting that a little modesty might save her? Frenchman Charles Perrault, who recorded the story of the girl and the wolf, lived in a turbulent era. He was born in the first half of the 17th century, managed to catch the period of power Richelieu, the Civil War in France, the 30 Years in Europe, the reign of Louis XIII, and see the brilliance of the Sun King. He spent most of his life compiling tales of Mother Goose, publishing it late in the century. Just 8 stories, but they made him immortal. After all, he gathered and refined the wandering tales French children heard at their nanny's knees. Cinderella has the richest backstory of them all. The earliest known version of this tale dates back to ancient Egypt. The girl's name was Rhodopis, a Greek captive, and she lost her sandal while bathing in the river. Naturally, it was the pharaoh who found it, marveling at the delicate craftsmanship of the tiny shoe. And so, he set out to find its owner. From there, the story unfolds much like Perrault's version, except with an Egyptian twist. Over the centuries, the tale traveled far and wide before the French gave it a makeover. The girl became a nobleman's daughter, the pharaoh morphed into a prince, and the little sandal turned into a slipper. But what kind of slipper? Now, here's where it gets interesting. We've all grown up believing it was made of glass, verre, and French. But in the 15th and 16th centuries, the word could also refer to verre, a rare, luxurious fur, often squirrel, used to trim fine footwear. Back then, fur-lined slippers were a status symbol, something a noblewoman might wear. So why wouldn't Cinderella flaunt a pair? The Cinderella plot pops up everywhere, from Italian folklore to Chinese legends, because it taps into a universal dream, a chance to change one's fate. In medieval times, climbing the social ladder was nearly impossible. How else could a poor girl rise to royalty? Only through magic and sheer luck. And no, her hard work had nothing to do with it. Early versions didn't reward her diligence. There was no fairy tale compensation. In fact, German renditions turned it into a revenge story. Here, Cinderella's mother dies because of another woman who later becomes her stepmother. With supernatural help, Cinderella ensures the villainess gets her comeuppance. No prince required. Perrault softened the tale, turning it into a romantic rags-to-riches fantasy, far more palatable for his era. By the mid-16th century, real-life kings were marrying commoners. Louis XIV, Perrault's contemporary, what his children's governess, and Sweden's King Eric even crowned a fishmonger as queen. Perrault knew these stories, and he scrubbed the darker medieval elements from the folktale. Gone were the gruesome details, like the stepsisters hacking off their heels to fit into the slipper. Instead, he gave us the Cinderella we know today, a story of love, transformation, in a shoe that changed everything. Bluebeard is another age-old tale with roots deep in the Middle Ages. Every Frenchman of the time understood its meaning. After all, it was inspired by the infamous Baron Gilles de Rais, a nobleman from the Hundred Years' War era. Dark legends swirled around him, accusing him of murdering his wives and guests in his castle. Even in Angelique, Marquise of the Angels, an old maid delights in frightening the young girls of the house with stories about the Baron. Yet, by Perrault's time, there was a far more recent Bluebeard to reference, King Henry VIII, who famously executed 2 of his queens. Though Perrault published the tale over a century later, the parallel to the Tudor king was hard to miss. The moral was simple: don't pry into matters that aren't your business. In the 17th century, a world of secrets and court intrigue, this was hardly irrelevant advice. Ironically, Gilles de Rais was posthumously exonerated in the 20th century. Scholars meticulously examined his life and concluded the medieval accusations were pure fabrication, a smear campaign by his enemies. Had this dark legend never taken root, we might not have had Bluebeard at all. The original Sleeping Beauty was just as grim. Both Perrault and the brothers Grimm sanitized it, but the folk versions were countless. Some say it's a tale of patience and endurance, yet in oral tradition, it also tested a suitor's devotion, the long sleep as his trial, or even sly cunning. One version has the princess bearing 2 children while asleep. Times have changed, but these medieval tales endure, constantly reinvented in films and cartoons. And they always will be. Every era insists on leaving its own mark.